Okay.
How we doing, sir?
Welcome, Mr. Frank Corva.
Yeah, how are you, Mr. Julian
Great.
Fahrer? How's everything?
Things are good. Thank you. Thanks for being here again.
Yeah.
Thanks to the early folks who have jumped in already. Thanks for being here again for this. I guess we're calling it the second episode of
Capital
Capital Gains.
gains. Yeah, unfortunately, we were trying to stay consistent each week. This, in many regards, the Tornado Cash trial kind of threw things off for me. For those who don't know, you cannot have any sort of video recording equipment or phones or anything, computers in the courtroom with you. So it was difficult to sneak out while I was covering that. But hopefully, we'll be more consistent from here on out. So sorry about 1 week sort of missing there, but we're back. Let's do it.
We are back.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as you said, we've missed a week, and a ton has happened in the world of Bitcoin, digital assets, policy, enforcement, regulation. There's a lot going on. You alluded to the Tornado Cash trial. Let's start at the end.
It's a good,
not going to start at the beginning.
Good place to start. Yeah.
We'll start at the end. So Roman Storm found guilty on one of the three counts on the indictment, conspiracy to run an unlicensed money transmitter. Am I getting that right? That's the guilty
technical conspiracy to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business.
Transmitting business.
That's it.
Yeah. So I guess before we jump into any details there, maybe just what's happening now? Like, are you expecting an appeal process? Like, this isn't kind of the end of the story. Like, where do you think we're kind of going immediately from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'll just cite Roman himself, who tweeted about this right after he left the courthouse on, when was that? I guess it was Wednesday afternoon, Eastern time. Yes, they will be appealing. I've spoken with his lawyers about it. I've spoken with other lawyers like Amanda Tuminelli from the DeFi Education Fund and Peter von Valkenburg, 2 interviews I recently did where, it's common knowledge, I think, that they'll be appealing it at this point, at least in the crypto space. I know this probably isn't a popular thing to say right now. I don't think this was the worst case scenario. And I think that this one particular charge is something they will be able to fight at the appellate court level. You might actually be able to speak to this better than I, but for those who are not familiar with this, being tried in the federal court system and then going to the appellate courts, it's a very different process. In the appellate courts, you're going to have 3 judges who are more of a specialist on this type of law, look at all of the evidence, decide whether or not the ruling at the federal level in the Southern District was correct. And I think people feel pretty confident that it wasn't, but even if they don't, I think they're ready to push this thing all the way to the Supreme Court. So the good thing is that I'm very happy to see that. So the jury was not unanimous on counts 1 and 3, which was conspiracy to launder money and then conspiracy to violate sanctions. I would have loved to have seen not guilty on those 2, but not unanimous is different in that the government could potentially retry him for those 2 things. I don't think they will, but we'll see. But having sat in the courtroom for the majority of this, there was really no evidence presented at all. If anything, it was only evidence to the contrary when it came to him saying, yeah, we want to be in business with you guys as you launder money. There was none of that. Like, you could make the argument that maybe, and I say like italics, all caps, maybe here, he could have done more to prevent people from using the service. But he did take actions to prevent people from using the service on the front end, like implementing a chain analysis oracle and things like that. But, the money transmission charges, there's a lot to say about that. We'll talk about this, I think, as far as the Clarity Act is concerned, and maybe even the document that the White House issued. I think it was last week now, the working group document on digital assets. I think that even Judge Faella, I'm going to say her name wrong, the judge for the Tornado Cash case, said, this is the thing that he was found guilty of is probably the most interesting charge in the case because there's the most debate over whether or not he was a money transmission business. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind here is that FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network that, is operated by the Treasury, said he wasn't, and said that nor were the Samourai devs, but the judge decided to proceed with this case anyway. So we'll see what happens here. I think from a different perspective, though, to look at this more from the human perspective, the sanctions violation and money laundering charges. Those each carried a maximum sentence of 20 years. And then money transmission sentence is 5 years. So he just had 40 years knocked off of his potential sentence, which is fantastic. So maximum 5 years. I've heard maybe if this all breaks the total wrong way, he maybe serves 1 or 2, which still totally sucks. We don't want to see that. But yeah, that's where they're at. So we're appealing at this point. People seem to feel, those in the know seem to feel he has a pretty strong case at the appellate level, but we're going to have to see what happens.
Yeah. So it's really interesting case. And similarly with Samourai, because we're kind of straddling the line between like the before times and in terms of like the perspective of the government, right?
Yep.
Pre-Trump era and post.
Yep.
And there's a constellation of things that have happened over the past few months. A bunch of different guidances being issued. Trump administration's policy announcements in a number of respects, even regulators within some of these agencies changing. And so that's where we are now. There's this kind of evolving landscape of, in particularly, perhaps specifically, this push to do away with what has, I guess, colloquially been known as regulation by enforcement throughout the kind of digital asset space. But the Samourai case and the Tornado Cash case are, they are maybe legacy cases almost from the prior administration.
Correct.
In some sense.
Yep.
And so there's a few questions here about, well, how do we kind of square that circle? Like, are these precedents being set? Are they representative of a likely government whole of government response going forward? These types of questions. And I think broadly, the answers there are probably no. Of course, that's not a complete answer either. Like the law is the law, and insofar as it's being decided that certain actions constitute, violations of money transmitter stuff or anything else, that's an issue for some of these, privacy issues and other things we'll talk about going forward.
Yep.
Maybe to dig in a little bit more specifically. Well, so relatedly, we mentioned Samourai. There was also a resolution there within the past couple of weeks too. Both the two of the founders, I think, pled guilty to a similar charge, right? Conspiracy
same
to the same charge.
Same exact same language. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess maybe just a quick high-level summary of what happened there, and then do you think, like, is it a coincidence that this is happening at the same time with these two cases, right?
Hard no, capital NO, period, afterwards. So I cannot disclose too much of what happened in the conversation, but the morning that the Samourai founders pled guilty, I ran into one of them in a coffee shop and had a 30-minute conversation with him. And I could share what I've sort of, what I can allude to from that, like what I think happened. I think essentially, and this is not something that this person said to me, but I think essentially the SDNY. Oh, did I lose you?
Hey.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think we're back.
Cool. Did I miss? What did we miss there? What should I repeat?
So you can just go from where you left off.
So I was saying I was there for both of these things. I was in the room when the Tornado Cash verdict was read, and also as the Samourai devs pled guilty. For those who are unfamiliar, these both happened in the Southern District of New York, which is, these courthouses were literally across the street from one another. So I literally left the closing arguments in the Tornado Cash case to go over to the Samourai hearing. And I said also that morning, I actually met with one of the Samourai devs, not intentionally. He happened to be in the same cafe with me, and we had a longer conversation. I've spoken with them a bunch throughout this process, before and after the pretrial hearings that I've attended. I think what happened is this is my takeaways. This is not what the Samourai developer told me, is that the Southern District of New York felt that things were not breaking the way that they wanted to in the Tornado Cash case. And I think they wanted a win under their belt. So they went to the Samourai devs and said, hey, we'll give you a guilty plea because we don't want precedent to be set with Tornado Cash that could then be cited in the Samourai case, which would have been tried in like November, a few months from now, where all three of the charges were dropped. So Samourai was facing 2 of the 3 charges, the exact same charges that Roman Storm was facing in the Tornado Cash trial. Roman Storm, so money laundering, money transmission business, and then sanctions violations. The Samourai developers had the first two, not the sanctions violations charge. So if there was a bad precedent set, bad by SDNY standards in terms of them wanting to sort of make an example of these developers, then things wouldn't have broken the way that they wanted. So the SDNY essentially took off the table for the plea deal that they offered Samourai. They took off the table the money laundering charge and said, we'll give you, you can plead guilty, agree to this thing, which was like a $6 million fine. And that was related to some of the funds that they had taken in. It was some percentage of the funds that Samourai had taken in over the life of its operations. And then potential, we haven't seen the sentencing for this yet, potential of 5 years in prison. It was very emotional to be in that room because I know the Samourai devs were ideological. It was, without saying too much, it was kind of sad. It was, I think that they had to take the plea deal because things changed with the judge that they were given. Two things about that judge. She has a very, very long track record of siding with the prosecution, with the Department of Justice. And then on top of that, her sentencing tends to be pretty not lenient, pretty strong. So if I were the Samourai devs, I would have taken the same deal. Something to keep in mind, taking a plea deal does not set case law precedent the same way losing in a trial does. So what happened with Roman Storm is an issue in terms of money transmission, but it's not. What happened with Samourai is a different scenario. It can still be cited apparently in court, but it doesn't have the same weight as something actually happening as the result of a trial. So Samourai devs took this plea deal. That's essentially done. We're still waiting on sentencing at this point. And that was that. That happened, I guess that was a Thursday. Also, yeah, that was a Thursday. So it was a week before the Tornado Cash verdict. There was obviously, literally the Samourai lawyers, one of the lawyers literally walked over from that hearing into the Tornado Cash hearing. They were paying attention to what was happening. Yep. So there was a lot of crossover with this stuff. And also for those who don't know, I've mentioned this on podcasts and stuff. Alexei Pertsev's lawyer was also in the Tornado Cash. He was in all the proceedings for Tornado Cash as well here. So Pertsev was tried in the Netherlands. He's one of the Tornado Cash co-founders. For people who don't know this, I didn't know this until I spoke with his lawyer. He's not serving time. I think he's under house arrest there. So he's been, they're working on the appeal case there. And they've apparently negotiated something where he's not in prison. Ideally, this is what we see with both Samourai and Tornado Cash. Is that maybe they serve some time under house arrest. I say ideally, not that that's like what we want to see happen to either of them, but if worse comes to worse and Roman Storm loses at the appellate level or even the Supreme Court level and the plea deal with Samourai sort of, that's already done. So worse comes to worse, we sort of maybe see some sort of house arrest or something along the lines of what they've been dealing with. And I say that because it's better than them going to a physical prison facility. Not that it's a great scenario. But yeah, I have to say on a certain level, on a personal level, I'm sort of happy these cases are done. Not because I'm ecstatic about the outcome, more because it's just a lot. It's grueling. It's emotional.
It's been a grind for you. Yeah. And everybody involved.
Yeah, man. And it's emotional. The judge actually, you could feel it. It was palpable in the room how emotional it was before the verdict was read. She asked people not to get emotional, us not to get emotional. And the other side to it is like the last few days of it, especially while the jury was deliberating, which was like a 3.5-day process. Some of us journalists that were in the room, and a quick shout out to Eleanor Terrett from Crypto in America, Cheyenne Langone from CoinDesk, Alex, I'm forgetting his last name, from DL News, and then also David Morris from The Rage did an excellent job covering this. But there were days where we just sat with Storm himself and his lawyers and just talked, and it was like we got to know him as a human being. We got to know his defense team and their story and how much they put into this and how much they believe that he's not, deeply believe that he's not guilty. They weren't just like a random law team that he hired to say, to make the argument. They really believe that he's not guilty and that this technology should proliferate and the developers of it shouldn't be charged. But let me stop there. That's the high level overview with some details, I guess. But yeah. All done. Some precedent has been set, but I think we're going to talk a little bit more about clarity. What might happen with clarity would supersede the precedent that has been set in this case. So,
yeah. Well, I guess before we do that, it's hard to, we don't want to get too over our skis here in terms of drawing conclusions from any of these things, because of clarity and because of other things. But I wonder if you have any preliminary thoughts, even just general thoughts about how you feel these cases might be influencing maybe a broader trend of privacy protections or lack thereof for Bitcoin and digital assets, and how, we're in this era now of massive institutional adoption of
Yep.
Bitcoin, green lights everywhere as far as banking licenses and everything else is concerned.
Yep.
However, is Bitcoin today and likely to be going forward really peer-to-peer digital cash? That's the question I'm driving at here.
Yeah, great question.
I guess thoughts on that, and do you think these cases have some bearing on that too?
100%. I want to read something. I interviewed Peter von Valkenburg. It was, oddly enough, the timing could not have been better. I think the verdict in the Tornado Cash was read at 12:30, and I had a 2 p.m. interview scheduled with him that day. I literally walked out of the courthouse across the street and interviewed him. For those who don't know, he's a legend. He's been one of the earliest people doing advocacy work and influencing policy at the federal level. He's also, I think Trump recently tweeted his description of Bitcoin to Congress. It was pretty legendary description, and to see it tweeted from Trump's not tweeted, but posted from Trump's Truth Social account was cool. But this is what he said to me. He said, if you couple what's happening with the idea that the DOJ didn't really put the brakes on these prosecutions, you start to wonder whether we're definitely going to be the crypto capital of the world for regulated ETF funds, or are we serious about making America the crypto capital of the world for peer-to-peer transactions and individual liberties? We should be. And I think that is the biggest question right now. Really, that's it. Obviously we're seeing green lights for everything Bitcoin and your 401ks and buy a house with Bitcoin and all this stuff. And I think this kind of points to the direction of Bitcoin is capital. It should be regulated as such, or it's a commodity or whatever. But I would argue that we've sort of failed. I think that fight, there's a big question mark there right now in terms of ability to use it as such. It's a very difficult question to answer.
It's tough. It's such a multifaceted problem. It's not just, this isn't a Bitcoin problem per se, even.
Yep.
We live in, not to be bearish about it, but by I think objective measures, we live in the most advanced surveillance state in the history of humanity, right?
Totally.
And this is not just a Bitcoin thing.
Yep.
This is everyone being connected to the internet all the time and being increasingly easily surveilled thing.
Yep.
Bitcoin is a smaller part of that story. Maybe could be a bigger one.
Yep.
But there certainly, it seems like, what's interesting about this particular problem and question, and we'll talk about this with respect to the White House executive order on debanking, perhaps is kind of relevant to that question too, is I think there is some appreciation and understanding at the highest levels of government that political abuse of the financial system, which a part of that is surveillance, has been a massive problem and is something that needs to be reformed.
Yep.
So we'll see. There isn't just one force at play here.
Correct.
There are, as we've seen, lots of different fronts on which there is big pushback against CBDCs.
Yep.
So I think that it's not a kind of unilateral. There are multiple powers at play here, and different things could still fall in a number of different directions. But certainly, as you say, it's hard not to feel a little bit disheartened about the likelihood of just individuals being able to transact peer-to-peer freely and privately.
Yep.
With I don't want to say precedents, but with these types of, it's not just these cases, right? It's the entire kind of regulatory regime. So we will see. I guess, well, relatedly, this is another kind of a minor thing. While we're talking about news from the past couple of weeks,
please.
Something that I noticed about a week ago was another one of these. I've got it up on our screen. I'm not sure if this is actually being streamed, by the way. If my screen share is working on the live version. But in any case, we can talk about it. So, related to this privacy question, one trend that I've noticed, we've touched on it lightly a couple of times on our show, is nationwide in a number of different states, there have been bills introduced and many passed now to clamp down on Bitcoin ATMs and kiosks in increasingly consistent, if not uniform, ways. And specifically what's happening is, and why I say this is news from last week, because another one of these bills was introduced in Wisconsin, which would require full KYC at Bitcoin ATMs, right? Yep. And so, just I guess why does this matter? Because really, unless you are quite a sophisticated Bitcoiner, finding ways online to acquire, let's say, KYC-free Bitcoin, the kind of funny old ATMs that you find in supermarkets and gas stations around the country is really the last way that anyone in the mainstream can do that.
Yep.
And it seems like governments are now increasingly enlivened to this fact and are introducing bills like this Wisconsin one is perhaps the most extreme one I've seen, but it's not the only one following this trend, which would require, as I said, full KYC for all transactions at an ATM. And not just KYC, would require photo identification for every single transaction. Like take a photo of yourself, upload it to the ATM, check it against your driver's license, just so you can use a Bitcoin ATM. To me, seems like an absurd overreach, and quite a serious intrusion into one's personal privacy. Like, you can imagine what would the response would be if you had to do this to like buy a lottery ticket or anything else, like these types of transactions people make, at gas stations around the country. So, I'm trying not to draw too long a red piece of string between all of these different things on a cork board, but we're seeing increase, like a lot of this stuff. Yes, there's like pushback against CBDCs and whatnot, but that is, I guess, more higher level and aspirational and the kind of thing that politicians argue about in Congress. But this is real. Like, this is a thing that individuals today are doing on the ground. And also the reason why it concerns me is I haven't seen anybody else talking about it, frankly.
Yep.
So I'm not a huge privacy. I'm certainly not a huge privacy advocate. I don't use ATMs. Personally don't. I'm not so worried about acquiring KYC free Bitcoin, but to see it all, to see the kind of concerted, coordinated efforts to shut it down at the same time that these trials are happening and everything else, it just makes me think, well, if I start to think a little bit conspiratorially about these things, it's like there's this kind of big sea change happening at the same time where it's, yes, let's bring Bitcoin into the financial system and political system, and also let's like smooth off all the rough edges all at the same time. So,
with you 100%, couldn't agree more. Will say that seeing everything I watched up close in these cases, the Samourai pretrial hearings, and then actually being at the trial for the Tornado Cash thing, I don't like to talk like this. I don't even like to put ideas like this into the universe, but I feel like I have to be honest and say it. It's like I feel a bit defeated, and I'm not even like Captain Privacy Advocate either. I just think that as we move into a world where everything's going to be digital, it's just like some semblance of privacy for human beings. I'm not talking about like every little thing. Again, it's just like, but like some ability to do something without a third party knowing, whether it's a government or a corporation. And I say that in terms of like one of the things I remember most, it really kind of blew my mind with Bitcoin, was Andreas Antonopoulos talking about like the fundamental decision when it comes to something like digital payments is, do you want to live in a world where when you make a payment to someone else, there's a third party permitting that to happen in every single transaction you make in your life? Whereas if you pass a dollar bill to someone else at a coffee shop to pay for your coffee, not that coffee costs $1 anymore, when you pass your $5 bill to someone at a coffee shop, there's no corporation in between you and that transaction. There's no government surveilling that transaction. I'll say this. I was on Cointelegraph's podcast or Space this week, and they're like, Bitcoin should be like cash. And I think the fundamental issue here is that it is in some ways, and then it's not in other ways. For example, the cash that you stuff under your mattress can't magically be teleported to North Korea overnight. That is the fundamental difference, right? We want it to act as cash. I get it. I also get this, and I'm not a simp for the state. I get that the state has national security concerns, and I don't know what the answer to this is. Some people are saying it's going to be zero knowledge proofs, where with digital IDs, you're able to reveal certain aspects of your information, whatever it is, like whether or not you're on an OFAC sanction list or something like that. I don't even love that, but I don't know the details as to what that would look like. I would just say that I think that this is the real conversation when it comes to like P2P rights. The rest of the stuff, I think the administration deserves credit for stuff. We'll talk about like, collateral for mortgages using Bitcoin and stopping debanking. These are all very, very good things, without a doubt, no question. But it doesn't really fulfill the whole promise of what Bitcoin was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth fighting for, because I think we're watching. So I'm going to have Freddie New, one of the heads of Bitcoin Policy UK, on my show, Bitcoin Politics, this week to discuss what's happening in England with censorship on the internet and needing to use a VPN to access most sites at this point. Even the fact that the sort of joking Coinbase video that they made about what's happening in the UK right now with cost of living being on the rise and all that wasn't allowed to run on like the censored internet in the UK. There's a broader issue here at play. And you could say what you want about America, but if we're going to live in a multipolar world, we need to be the pole that believes in freedom tech. We need to be. I don't know what the world looks like if we're not. You know what I mean? Like China and Russia are not going to get this right. We already know that they've essentially gotten it wrong. India is sort of the big question mark, but I don't really want to rely on them to try to get it right. I just think
it's to me and a couple minutes more on nightmare stuff, and then we can move on to something more positive.
Exactly,
but it is worth talking about.
Yep.
And seriously, because I think people, when they as you were just saying, people imagine what the world could look like, and it's, well, do we want to look like America, or do we want to look like one of these scary foreign exotic countries like China or Russia or not? It's like, no. We're talking about England,
right?
And we're talking about where I'm from, Australia, which just recently passed a new law requiring age. I think similar to the UK. So there's a blanket ban, firstly, on quote unquote social media for anyone under 16. But of course, that's inclusive of YouTube and other, and that's other things inevitably too, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that there's this bedrock of Western liberalism that's kind of unassailable, even in ostensibly Western liberal countries today, is, I think, that's the rug is being pulled out from underneath that assumption. And so, we straightforwardly very much need America to kind of stay the kind of last line of defense there.
And I say that, I don't think that's a jingoistic or like waving an American flag, wearing a Hulk Hogan t-shirt sort of like thing to say.
Nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Yeah, totally. I'm into it, to be honest. But, I think the idea is that, I don't know. I'll be honest, man, it's been a hard week. I was really sad walking out of the courthouse for a bunch of reasons, but it was just a lot to be there emotionally. And it wasn't just the verdict itself that did it. But we sort of, in the United States, relatively speaking, I've grown up essentially swimming in freedoms. You know what I mean? Like generally speaking, compared to other places around the world. And I think a lot of people have as well. And I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. I'm not even a big like everything needs to be private, hidden, blah blah blah. Like but I am really starting to feel this clamp around my chest when it comes to like, are we all just going to be cattle? Like, are we all just going to be sort of, you know, herded into our pens and doing this? And I think there's a real fear of that. And there's going to be gradients of this. So like maybe Bitcoin remains permissionless, but surveilled. Okay, maybe then not all is lost. I mean, it is surveilled to a degree, but again, like KYC is not necessarily tied to a wallet address. It can be figured out relatively easily, especially if you bought your Bitcoin on an exchange or something. But there's real stuff at stake here in terms of like the effect that it's going to have on human psychology and what it means to be free and start a business. And I don't know. There's just real stuff.
And the willingness of people to do that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, we're wandering into more speculative territory here, but I think it's really interesting. If you look at the data, I think the rates of, you said starting a business, rates of entrepreneurship in general are down and trending down, like long term in the United States. And it makes, you know, this is a multifactorial problem, but if you're worried about taking risks, business risks, financial risks, because this, you know, among other reasons, the state is just hovering above your shoulder constantly. What are you going to do? You're not going to open a business. Right?
That's it.
You're not. One of the, you know, this is maybe a funny analogy, and I don't mean to, again, be overly alarmist, but one of the things that people have understood in kind of corporate America, and not just America, for the past few years, is that everything you say or do on a company computer or laptop or Slack or anything else, it's basically admissible in court as evidence against you, right?
Of course,
and not literally court, but the figurative court of like the human resources department of where you work, right? And so you have to know that. Frank, I don't know if you're still there. Maybe losing you. We got you back. Yeah. So you know, there's this idea that it's kind of a running joke that if HR or anybody else ever wants to fire someone, all they have to do is look through this person's Slack history, and inevitably the evidence will be forthcoming, or you can kind of construct it. You know, find enough posts, and you can make whatever story you need to. And you know, it's kind of it's not humorous example. I mean, this genuinely does harm the way that people kind of live and work, and it's an important problem. But I think by way of analogy, you can extend that to financial transactions too, right? Imagine if every single financial transaction you make, thousands of them, are all on a record somewhere that the government has access to, and at any point in time, someone could kind of look through that ledger that they have access to, pick out whatever they want, and construct a case against you. Right? It's going to be admissible against you. So whatever the case may be, you get put in front of a jury of your peers, and the state adduces into evidence all of the times that you have made some kind of suspicious financial transaction, and all together on one slide. You know, how's that going to make you look, right? So this is, it's hard to imagine this. And also, I think probably more importantly, for most people, this kind of thing would never happen. But it's the threat that it could, as you said, that affects human psychology and kind of pens people in closer and closer. In the lines, the kind of contours of the free space that you have to move in gets smaller and tighter over time. So, slowly boiling the frogs, right?
100%. And let's wrap it up just so we don't seem too doomer here. But I'll say this: I think I'm glad that we're doing this, publicly, having these conversations. And I've said it. I bring him up a lot because I think he is thinking about this, and I think in a sophisticated way. So Tim Massett from the former CFTC chair, I simply said to him, I said, do you want to be subject to all of the surveillance? Do you want that? Do you want us to see all your balances, to know all the transactions you made? Like when you make a transaction, he's like, no, and we need a proper solution for it. So I'm going to try to take him at his word that he means that, and that there's hopefully going to be dialogue between the Peter von Valkenburgs of the world and the Amanda Tuminellis and the Bitcoin Policy Institute and other, beyond Bitcoin and everything else, other services that use encryption to preserve privacy when it comes to messaging and transferring value and all this stuff. Because I don't think anyone really wants to have everything that they do surveilled at all times. It just, the problem there is we sort of have to rely on people speaking up and trying to sort of defend these rights. We're seeing some of that. I think we have seen a decent amount of that with Bitcoin and crypto, people speaking up and calling their elected officials and voting. So I'm trying to remain optimistic. But it's been, this has tried my faith. The last 2 weeks have tried my faith for sure. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to some slightly more positive news, at least. Directionally positive things as far as Bitcoin is concerned. One of them was a bill introduced by Senator Cynthia Lummis a little over a week ago called the 21st Century Mortgage Act of 2025. This is, in short, well, you can see the short title here, to require government-sponsored enterprises to consider digital assets in mortgage loan risk assessment. So that would be Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
I'm back. I don't know what's
momentarily
going on.
Last year.
Sorry about that.
Restream is messing us up. So this would be a bill to, I guess, codify. Well, it's hard to know. I have to dig into the details to find out who is ultimately responsible and what needs to happen for this to happen, which would be for individual people to be able to use their Bitcoin holdings in the process of applying for a mortgage application. So that's what this bill seeks to do. We also had Bill Pulte, the head of the Federal Housing Financial Authority, whatever it's called, a couple of weeks ago, put out a kind of directive to similar effect here. So some of this is agency responsibility. I guess this is an attempt from Senator Lummis to kind of codify this into law as well. A couple of things to note here. There's some chatter about this. Big caveat here, of course, is that this would require a qualified custodial arrangement. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to use self-custody Bitcoin to, take your hardware wallet down to the local mortgage broker and sign a transaction in front of their face to prove that you own it. That's maybe some years away from doing that. But so if you get your Bitcoin with a qualified custodian, we will see. May be able to do what many Bitcoiners have wanted to do for a long time and use it to diversify, maybe get a roof put over their heads. I know it's something that I kind of look forward to personally. So.
Yeah, it's a cool development for sure. Ideally, maybe we move to a technology where, I don't know, your Bitcoin is in a multi-sig with other Bitcoin or something. I don't know. They're like something like what Debify does for loans. Maybe we do a similar thing with mortgages, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, well, there is a subclause here. Actually, it's on screen for allowing for kind of a multi-party custodial arrangement. Okay. So at least that's the first attempt to put that out into the world. Obviously, these things, as they progress through committees and everything else, you never know what the final version of this legislation could look like if it even gets passed. But there you go. Senator Lummis has at least tipped the cap to potential multi-sig type arrangements with this concept. Okay, so moving on, we had a couple of executive orders just yesterday relating to Bitcoin digital assets and other things. The first one, called Democratizing Access to Alternative Assets for 401k Investors, is, well, doing just that, as the name would suggest. And I should say, there's a kind of a key point here. So just zoom out a little bit. So 90 million Americans do not have the opportunity to participate, according to the White House, through their retirement plans in kind of opportunities associated with alternative asset investments. This, of course, includes several different types of investments, private equity, direct investment in commodities, of course, digital assets and other things too. So what does this executive order actually do? It directs the Secretary of Labor, of the Department of Labor, to re-examine some of the guidance that they've put out. So as best as I can tell, a lot of this is there's agency discretion here, and the Department of Labor has a few pieces of guidance out, essentially telling fiduciaries how conservative and cautious they need to be when considering this stuff. And so this executive order is kind of saying to the Secretary of Labor, hey, we want you to re-examine all this guidance that you've got out there, which is, I think, somewhat restrictive right now. There was some 2020 guidance in the first Trump administration that tried to open the door to this, and then in end of 2021, that kind of got either rescinded or amended by some further guidance under the Biden administration, kind of tightening the window again. So this is another attempt to say, hey, let's re-examine all this guidance. Let's see if we can relax the constraints on fiduciaries with how conservative they have to be. And not just that. I mean, this is the executive order itself is quite explicit, right, in terms of the objectives here. Like, we want all this stuff in 401ks. So that is that. Of course, I should say, again, it's going to be, as far as Bitcoin is concerned, managed investment vehicles, right? Yep. So this is going to be ETFs.
Yep.
Okay, so second executive order from yesterday, guaranteeing fair banking for all Americans. This is it's related to what we were talking about before a little bit with privacy. It's also a kind of much more, in a sense, personal executive order as far as Trump and his family are concerned, right?
Yep.
So broadly speaking, what is this executive order attempting to do? It's to eliminate politically motivated debanking. This is the kind of the one-liner here. Sorry if you can hear a whining. That's because I've got a little kitten running around. There are a few. It's interesting. If you look at the first paragraph of here, you can see in the purpose is made explicit reference to some of the stuff that happened after January 6th. So a bunch of Trump supporters, I guess, were targeted in the wake of January 6, 2021. The protests on the Capitol, people were kind of tracked down even by or surveilled just on the basis of where they'd shopped at Bass Pro Shop or other places, allegedly. So, there's a kind of certainly a political motivation in kind of including this in the purpose of it. Yep. However, it's not really just this. And it's behind the scenes, what's going on here is, of course, a couple of things. There's Operation Choke Point 2.0, the broad-based debanking of many people in the crypto industry.
Yep.
But then, of course, there is the debanking that Trump and his family experienced themselves, quite extraordinarily. And in fact, I don't have the tab open, but I think Trump was interviewed just the other day on CNBC about this and described what happened to him. And he had, I don't know if it was JP Morgan or wherever he was banking, but he, as has happened to so many other people across the country, got a phone call saying, well, Mr. President, we're shutting down your bank account. You're going to have to take $40 million in cash or however much it was and find a new home for it. And then as he tells it in this interview, he rang around to Bank of America and other places, and basically CEOs of these big banks just hung up the phone on him, more or less, and said, no, we don't want your business. And so and again, this is the kind of story I've heard from many, non-famous, even important or influential people politically who have had to go through things like this, finding small credit unions, taking whatever you got in your checking account and dividing it up into small enough portions and finding a bunch of other small banks, whoever will kind of take your money and re-bank you. Operation Choke Point 2.0, debanking, it's a massive subject. We won't cover it all here, but the executive order here, I guess if we focus on that, well, what is it attempting to do? It's attempting to prevent banks from engaging in these types of practices. I won't read through the whole executive order, but what I will do, I think, is more interesting and a better way of analyzing it is look to some of the actual experts in this space and see what they think of it. One being Nick Carter, who I think in a way broke the initial Operation Choke Point 2.0
he coined the
story,
term.
right? He coined the term.
Yeah.
And so he put out a Substack post discussing this. Of course, in a sense, it's, he's supportive of the idea, but I think what's the kind of caveat here that he raised, as did Caitlin Long, who I'll move to in a moment, is that the risk with this type of executive order is that it's putting all of this pressure on the banks. Like, as in, now, of course, it's the banks who themselves are making the ultimate decision to deny somebody's service.
Yep.
But they're not, on Nick Carter's telling and other folks too, it's not because of a business decision. It's because of pressure from the government, right? They've been told to, by whether it's, FinCEN or whoever behind the scenes, that they need to. I mean, this is why this is the political part of political debanking, right? And so the I wouldn't say it's a risk, but it's certainly a question that's being raised now as well. Is it good enough to merely, put tighter standards on the practices of banks when they were only doing what they were told to do in the first place? And in fact, Caitlin Long made this exact point, right? So Fed investigator goes to the bank, hey, why did you debank us? The bank says, well, because you told us to. And so that's where we're at. So there's some interesting commentary on this executive order, but certainly, I suppose, a step in the right direction for wiping the slate clean.
I would argue, it's at least acknowledging the issue. At the very least, that's I think, I was having this conversation with a bunch of people this week. It's like, are we moving in the right direction? But this is more about some of the P2P stuff we were talking about earlier, like P2P rights and privacy. In some ways, just a simple acknowledging of Operation 2.0, saying something about it. I would say it's a step in the right direction. I think that practice, the debanking stuff, would have only gotten worse. And I'm not saying who you should have voted for, what you agree, but I believe it would have gotten worse had Harris been elected. And while you might have some issues with the way this EO is worded, at least we're acknowledging the fact that this was happening and trying to take some steps to not have it happen again. So
I should say too that this is not uncontroversial. Like, this isn't, I think some of the problem with any action related to a politically motivated problem is that action or response itself could be viewed as politically motivated and biased and maybe, taking advantage of the political power that you have now that you didn't have before. But I guess I want to make it clear that this is real. Like, this for sure happened, not just to folks in the crypto industry who, but I remember hearing a story, and I'll kind of anonymize it so I don't reveal, but I heard story of, this is from the kind of, someone intimately involved with the case. The wife of a former political party president in a state, so fairly disconnected from anything really political at all, but this person's wife was debanked under the Biden regime. And hearing that story made me think, well, how many countless times has this happened around the country? If such a inconsequential person can kind of fall into this trap, it must have been happening all the time. So, again, this not necessarily just a Bitcoin problem, but it's all related.
Correct. There's broader things happening here. So if you don't mind, we'll take a quick moment to touch on this. So lately, I've been talking about how Bitcoiners should maybe start thinking, I say it more in relation to the crypto space. Stop thinking more in terms of like we're Bitcoiners and you're shitcoiners, and start thinking about a Venn diagram where your interests align, because we're better off at this point making allies. And this is beyond even crypto, privacy advocates more generally, legal activists, whatever it is, because there are just some general things that are happening that affect Bitcoin, but that are much broader, as you're pointing to. And I think it's time for people to start thinking that way. It's really, really important that we stop thinking like, if it doesn't directly, if you can't in your mind sort of say like, this is a Bitcoin thing, if that's all you care about, you're a single issue voter, you're this. It's time to start thinking a lot more broadly, because a lot of things can end up affecting Bitcoin or the industry that supports Bitcoin. There's a lot of things happening right now. And, I'm saying this kind of gently, I'm not trying to be mean, but like, I think it's time for people to sort of wake up to a lot of these dynamics and start deciding what side they're on and who they want to align with, and what role they want to play in pushing back on these things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think even just, it's a bigger issue. We don't need to get into the maxi stuff now, but my view is like, these arguments are over. Like Bitcoin has won.
Right.
It is the, maybe there's a second best, maybe there's not. I don't think it matters, right? Bitcoin has won. It's, this, you almost give too much credit to some of these other things. Correct. By even having this conversation around, well, are we in competition? No, we're not in competition at all. And even, you kind of do yourself a disservice even by kind of validating that idea. So
totally.
Agreed. Enough said on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so something else. Moving on, if we turn our attention back to Congress, obviously we have the Clarity Act. Well, not making its way through Congress now. I think everyone's on summer vacation still, but
that's right.
Now in the Senate, as we touched on a couple of weeks ago, the Senate Banking Committee had released their discussion draft of their version of Clarity. Still waiting on the Ag Committee to do the same thing. But there was a letter written by several folks in the industry to the Senate Banking Committee just this week, I believe. And they've got a post up on screen here for those who can see it, from Dan Robinson at Paradigm. A letter in support of the Senate Banking Committee's approach, and in particular, this ancillary assets test that we did a kind of deep dive on last time. High level, I won't break out my flowcharts again, but high level, good
flowcharts, great flowcharts.
Thank you. Yeah. We had this is a new test in the Senate version of the Clarity Act, and so as quickly as I can explain it, in the House version, the way that one of the things that the Clarity Act was going to do was kind of settle this commodities versus securities question. And it was going to do that by introducing this test for what they call a mature blockchain system. And it was essentially a decentralization test. So how much control do individuals have? How distributed are the tokens and all this other kind of stuff? So if it's decentralized enough, then it doesn't go to the SEC. And if it's not decentralized enough, then it's not mature, and it does, and it's a security. So that was the House Clarity test. The Senate Banking Committee kind of threw that out and introduced something completely different called the ancillary assets test, which doesn't focus at all on how decentralized a system is or a token, distribution is. It instead focuses on what the rights that accrue to the holders of the token. And depending on which rights accrue, do you get yield? Do you get ownership, voting rights, whatever? Then the test that then is applied is, okay, well, if you get a lot of these kind of rights that give you kind of ownership, then then we're kind of in the SEC house again. And if not, then you're this kind of ancillary asset. You either are or you aren't an ancillary asset. But the point is, that's the test now. So it's about rights, and it's not about decentralization. So this is all kind of technical and wonky. But maybe what is kind of interesting to see here is a perhaps burgeoning, I don't want to say split in the industry, but some potentially clear differences of opinion on whether or not this is a positive update to the House framework or not, right? And so the letter here, penned by I don't know who's penned by, I should say, signed by Paradigm, and I think it's a Paradigm letter, and lots of others, Multicoin, Chainlink, Electric Capital, Galaxy, Ribbit, Tribe Capital. Lots of folks signed on to this to say, yep, we agree, this new rights-based ancillary assets test, that's the way we want to go. It's not actually consensus in the industry. And so, in fact, you can see another post now. So Eleanor Terrett saw this post from Dan and said, so interesting to see most of the major crypto VCs have kind of signed on to this, aside from A16Z. So this is Andreessen Horowitz. And then a reply from Miles Jennings, who I think is one of the senior policy folks and partners at A16Z, saying, well, I wouldn't say it's most major crypto VCs. In fact, most major crypto hedge funds is more accurate. Most major crypto VCs supported Clarity's token maturity framework. So
interesting.
So this is interesting. So we've now, so a couple of things to note here. One is, I almost detect a kind of derogatory undertone there, talking about hedge funds versus VCs from Miles. And then I guess the second thing is, obviously, if what he's saying is correct, then there's this divide now. So I haven't thought too deeply on this. I certainly haven't asked anybody about this, but it's maybe interesting to speculate about and certainly get comment on from someone at some point. Not that I'm going to tell you how to do your job, Frank, but
no, it's important.
So why? I guess this is the question: why would folks who we might say are more like hedge funds be supportive of the ancillary, of this new Senate approach, and why would the VCs more support the, decentralization test? Well, off the top of my head, I would say it's because the VC, the hedge funds, they want exposure, they have exposure and want exposure to anything that they can get that, in a token sense, that's likely that could perform really well. And so therefore this new Senate test is perhaps broader and more inclusive and would allow many more of the kind of long tail of tokens to, get a smoother path, to a kind of clearer regulatory path.
Yeah.
And to not be kind of considered to be a security. Whereas for the VCs, they do kind of invest broadly in a sense, but not in a token sense. They're not out there like, investing in all of these different, tokens in the same way. They're investing in companies. It's a different model, right? Yep. And so anyway, I don't want to belabor the point, but talk about, as we were just talking about, kind of the unified fronts being presented within the industry, and that perhaps is tactically important and strategically, but this may be a little fault line emerging in how Clarity progresses through the Senate.
Yeah, it's definitely important to bring up. I'll just sort of say, in my mind, why it's important also, and this is something I've spoken a lot about with Valkenberg and Amanda Tuminelli, policy people. We've touched on this before as well, but there's really important language and clarity around what constitutes a money service business, what doesn't. And I think it's, if you're just looking at it through that angle, sort of this, what just happened with Samourai and Tornado Cash angle, and trying to alleviate, have that not happen again, having major factions of the industry be split on this probably stop the bill from progressing. So I think that it's important, even if you don't want to talk about other tokens. I get that. Like if that's not your thing, just looking at it through that language, look through that lens as well. Like, what's essentially going to halt this bill? If it's going to take a lot more negotiation now, what does that actually mean for getting this bill passed? If you're a Bitcoiner, you want everybody to put aside their differences, exactly,
and hold hands and get along, so the Blockchain Certainty Regulatory Act can just kind of safely pass along with everything else.
Yep.
And then whatever anybody else wants to do around tokens, you might not care about at all. But you should want them to not tear this thing apart.
Totally. I think that's the issue with the fact that we're just in this era of everything being a sort of, I guess, in a way, a bit of like an omnibus bill. Now there's different gradients of like what omnibus means, but like, if the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which that language I was talking about with, purveyors and developers of non-controlling or non-custodial tech not being subject to money transmission laws or needing money transmission licenses, if that act, which is only 2 pages on its own, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, the language of which was taken and put into Clarity, a version of that language was put into Clarity. If that was just being voted on by itself, then yeah, some of this stuff wouldn't be as consequential to the Bitcoin world or whatever, because ideally we would just vote on that and that would be that. But because it's now tied to these other debates that are going to be happening, it's something that we all have to pay attention to. And this, again, I've said this many times, but also I wrote about this with the Genius Act. With Genius, I said Bitcoiners should pay attention to this too, because if in Genius it says that every wallet needs to be KYC'd, because these are bearer assets and we need to know who's using them, could be the same for Bitcoin wallets. So everyone should be paying attention to anything crypto related, and then even beyond that, in some cases related to other topics that are crypto adjacent, Bitcoin adjacent, privacy related, blah, blah, blah. So a lot going on. I know the average person cannot necessarily process all of this on a day in, day out basis. Part of the reason you and I are doing this stream.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to sort of keep you in the loop with all this stuff. But again, I think my big theme is this, and I'll do a little shilling if you don't mind. And I'm extending the invite to you right now, Julian, to come on and talk. But we'll be collaborating with Stand With Crypto on August 14th. So Stand With Crypto is like an advocacy group, in part sponsored by Coinbase, that does a lot of work with like get out the vote campaigns and getting crypto advocates to call their senators, congresspeople, elected officials. And we're going to do this on it's August 14th, 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to get an hour of the day. Other institutions and media outlets that'll be taking up other hours will be CoinDesk, Crypto in America, the DeFi Education Fund, Coinbase themselves, a bunch of people, and we'll be talking about the importance of advocating for proper legislation and all of this kind of stuff. And again, it just speaks to this broader theme of like, let's please start looking at things like a Venn diagram. Look at what you have in common with people versus what differentiates you from them in the broader crypto space. Bitcoin is a crypto asset. Some people might not like to hear that, but it is, and it does get lumped in with everything else. For better or worse, I'm not really here to make that judgment. It's just the way that things work right now.
Yep.
And it's just something to keep our eyes open to. It's I just don't people say Bitcoin has already won or Bitcoin will win inevitably. Like, everybody's definition of what winning looks like, I would imagine, is different. I'm sure some people think winning with KYC on every wallet is a thing. I don't personally think that's winning, but there's gradients to winning in my book. We need to pay attention to everything that's happening on the periphery of this. Maybe if the act or the legislation or the case doesn't have the word Bitcoin slapped on it, it doesn't mean it won't have an effect on Bitcoin. So that's it. My call to action there. Yeah.
Yep. That's right. To use an overly dramatic, to paint an overly dramatic picture for folks.
Yeah.
If a giant Death Star appears on the horizon one day, it's with Elizabeth Warren's face on it, right, threatening to wipe us all off the face of the planet. It doesn't do a lot of good to say, oh well, those humans over there are not like us humans over here, right?
Yeah.
So whether or not you like it, if you have a big enough and important enough enemy that puts you in a certain category, then this is why certain cliches like the friend of my enemy of my enemy type of thing exists, right?
Totally.
And so what we do is we talk about politics and we talk about policy and we talk about messy compromises, I suppose, on this show. And there's certainly it's important, by the way, for people to be advocates for pure principles. That matters. Like that really matters. Totally. But there's a dialogue between pure principles and then what do you do in a world of political realities. And I suppose what we do is to try and draw a thread between the two.
100%. It's funny. I sometimes long for the days of when I first got into Bitcoin and just believed every meme and that Bitcoin would automatically win. And now that I'm like in the thick of it, I'm like, can I just go back to what it was like when I just sort of believed that none of this had to happen?
You can't unsee it. You can't unsee it, Frank. You've been in the White House. You can't.
It's been a trip. So it's I think what I'm trying to say is, to everybody listening, it's not like a super call to action. If you only make one call to your elected officials, that's great. That's amazing. It's you don't have to upend your life. to get involved with this kind of stuff. But if you do believe in a world where some of the stuff we're talking, if it gives you a bad feeling in your gut to think of a world where the stuff we're talking about, these topics we're touching on, break the wrong direction and you don't have certain freedoms that you wish you had, it's up to you. I mean, it is the special part of America, which is a very flawed country in many ways. It's very remarkable in other ways. But part of the reason it works on whatever levels it does is because people do get involved. I truly believe that that's not just me sort of asking you to sort of back up what Julian and I are doing here, but like to really sort of become a part of the process and to feel the sense of empowerment that comes with that. You know, it's a huge thing. I mean, even it's funny. It's like, even I'll take a small example, and it's not exactly like advocacy, but even like, you know, all these journalists are trying to get out of the likes of Bo Hines and David Sachs and everybody else. Like, how much Bitcoin does the U.S. government have? And then like Lola Leach just goes and, you know, puts in a FOIA request and finds out. It's like, that's a sense, that's a type of like, just do something. Like if you know, like just do something. And now there's more information out there. Now the dialogue has to change around this thing. And I will say, like, just don't forget how much the Overton window has shifted. The fact that we're talking about all this stuff, that we're now talking about privacy. Shout out to Eleanor Terrett as well, who interviewed Bo Hines last week and brought up the Roman Storm case in the White House, talking to Bo Hines. Like we're allowed to do this now. And I'm not saying, I say that facetiously. We can have these conversations. There are things that we're having with the highest people in the highest rungs of power. The more your voices are a part of this, and a massive shout out to Stand With Crypto. They did an amazing job. I was out on the campaign trail as they went to all the swing states. I went to 3 of those swing states, interviewed people there about who they're voting for. One of the biggest trends that I thought was amazing was it was not just a lot of bros, white bros, crypto bros. It was, I remember speaking with a woman who was like a recent Vietnamese immigrant who really cared about crypto and private, you know, self-custody and stuff like that, a 20-something-year-old. And she was just like, yeah, she told me who she was voting for. And they were half Democrat and half Republican. You know, they weren't thinking along party lines. So the shift is sort of happening. We have entities like Stand With Crypto are capitalizing on that. So keep an eye open for that. August 14th, Bitcoin Magazine will be doing the 2 p.m. Eastern slot. We'll be joined by also Zach Shapiro from the Bitcoin Policy Institute. And hopefully Julian will jump on for at least maybe a portion of that hour. He has an invite.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, in the spirit of getting involved, that's what we're doing at Bitcoin Magazine. We're bringing everybody else in our world, Bitcoin Laws, Bitcoin Policy Institute in that world in. But yeah, take this stuff seriously. That's all I could say. You don't have to, you don't have to upend your life, but take it seriously and maybe choose your battles, choose the thing you want to fight for and speak up for, and talk to your elected officials about it. And your elected officials, this is not just like a group of people who are politicians and they don't listen. Some listen more than others. Some are in it for reasons that you might agree with more than others who are in it for reasons that, you know, you might not agree with. It's all different. It's a mixed bag. So keep an open mind as you speak with these people. Yep.
Very well said. Nothing for me to add, really.
No notes.
Well, no notes, not a single note. Well, perhaps with that, I think that's probably everything on the agenda. So capital gains, episode 2 in the books. Thank you again, Frank. Thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Yeah.
And we will see you back here next time.
Sounds good. We'll talk next week. Take it easy, everybody.